Just went straight to the what.
Good on you.
Hello, everybody. Sitting down with Phil Weirden yet again for Romans chapter 2 today. Yesterday we kind of talked about chapter 1 and some of the complexities around the judgment and the pointing fingers and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. And Paul's going to continue that in chapter 2, isn't he, Phil?
He is. I just when I first read this part in preparation for this, I was thinking he's such a lawyer because he comes out and says, following on from that chapter 1 where it was like looking at everybody's sin and all their internal sort of stuff that can separate us from God, he sort of says, you may be saying what terrible people these are. When you say they are wicked and should be punished, you are condemning yourself, for you do these very same things. For you know that God in his justice will punish anyone who does such things. Do you think that God will judge and condemn others for doing that and not judge you when you do exactly the same?
You can almost imagine a lawyer, going at hammer and tong, can't you?
Yeah. I can sort of see it's like where they're going, yes, I'm pointing the finger, and all of a sudden it's like, he says, well, you're doing the same thing.
Yeah, it's a very clever way of saying, hey, there's three fingers pointing back at you.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Just remind me of David and Nathan the prophet when he pulls David up on killing Uriah and sleeping with
and the whole lamb story and all that.
It was like, subtly draw him in and said, yes, you are that person.
Yeah. It's a very clever rhetorical device that he's using here, but it's really good because if we allow it to confront us, we all do this. It's human nature to blame.
Yeah.
To see the fault in others. And like you said in yesterday's episode, there are specks. And I've been listening to Tim Mackey and John Collins talking about this as they've been doing the Sermon on the Mount. And I remember Tim Mackey saying, Jesus actually says, first remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. So it's interesting. He's not saying you shouldn't remove the speck from your brother's eye.
Yeah.
We actually need each other. He's just saying before you remove the speck from your brother's eye, just make really sure that you got your plank out of your own eye. And I think that's the bit we skip.
Yes. Yeah. I have heard that before, but I'd forgotten about that side of it. But
It's like he doesn't say, get the plank out of your own eye. It's not your responsibility to worry about the speck in your brother's eye.
Yeah.
And Paul will say this in 1 Corinthians chapter 5. He'll say, it's not my job to judge those outside the church, but it's my job to judge those inside the church.
Yeah.
So it's not saying that there isn't space for correction, direction, but let's just make sure that first of all, we check that those three fingers pointing back at us, we address that first.
Yeah.
I think that's what he's kind of saying here, because he's addressing a self-righteous attitude that says, you guys are the problem.
Yeah.
He's going, no, actually, if you're saying you're the problem, the other people are the problem, you're probably the problem.
Yeah. I must admit, I always sort of think, if what's the common denominator? Like when you sort of keep whinging about the same, this person does this and this person does that and this person does that. Well, what's the common denominator? And it's usually
us. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and this is definitely the human nature that we have to work on.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, and I worked out when it's like, in my job, it was like I get sick of the politics and I would leave. And then I get sick of the politics and leave. And finally I've worked out, it's probably not the politics that
smart.
It's probably me having to work my way through.
Find your way to work through the politics or whatever.
Work with it.
Yeah, exactly. Good call. Yeah, that's right. Sometimes we just need to be as innocent as a dove and as shrewd as a viper, Jesus called it. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So you're going to find politics everywhere. So in the world, in your workplaces, it's always out there because it's human nature. Sometimes we've just got to figure out how to work with it rather than just become the victim all the time. Yeah, good.
But it doesn't quite just, like Paul doesn't leave you under the judgment, but he will say he will give eternal life to those who persist in doing what is good, seeking after the glory and honour and immortality that God offers. So God, it's not all a downer.
No, it's right, because we are broken.
Yeah.
We rightfully have got three fingers pointing at us because we are screwed up.
Yeah.
But if we continue to seek God, there's an offer of honour and peace for all who do good. Yeah. For the Jew first and then the Gentile. We talked about that yesterday.
Yeah. This is where I got, from my question from yesterday, this is where I actually picked up on this, whereas it says there will be trouble and calamity for everyone who keeps on sinning, for the Jew first and also for the Gentile, but there will be glory and honor and peace from God for all who do good, for the Jew first and also for the Gentile, for God does not show favoritism. It's like God will judge the good and the bad in all of us.
Yep.
And
the funny, he chooses the judgment first. He says, you Jews, you think you're first because you're prominent? He goes, well, actually, you're first. You might be first because you're first in the order. Also means you're going to be first for judgment.
Yeah.
And then the other side of it. Because it's not about, he finishes with God does not show favoritism. He's trying to help people who have an elitist view. And I don't think it's either, you get the impression from Romans, it's not just the Jews thinking they're better than the Gentiles. I think it's actually the Gentiles thinking they're better, they're more liberal than the Jews. They're more free than the Jews. And so they're sitting in judgment because of their quote unquote freedom that they've experienced over the last few years while there's been no Jews in the church. And Paul's going to point at both of them and say, your problem is you're both wrong.
Yeah.
You actually need to recognize you've got value. Each of you has got value and you're equal. Yeah. There's no favoritism.
And then goes on to sort of saying, well, okay, it says, because it was originally punishing the Jews, but he sort of then says, well, he'll also punish the Gentiles, even though they've never heard of God's written law. But it's like, for it's not merely knowing the law that brings God's approval. Those who obey the law will be declared right in God's sight. So it's even when the Gentiles who do not have God's written law instinctively follow what the law says, they show in their hearts they know right from wrong.
It follows on from our conversation yesterday.
It
does.
Yeah.
There's something about, there's an intuitiveness of the human heart, the conscience.
Yeah.
I think we downplay conscience too much in the Christian life.
Yeah.
I think that's a gift from God that every human has, that we are deeply moral beings. And not saying we shouldn't focus on the salvation work of Jesus, but just because we're saved doesn't mean that our conscience isn't still an issue. Because Paul will say elsewhere, I think Corinthians or something, he'll say, if you continue to do wrong, your conscience gets seared like a hot iron.
Yeah.
And when you sear something, it loses its sensitivity. We cannot downplay the gift of conscience. I think that is a massive thing that God has wired into humanity. We are among all creatures, it would appear, the only ones that exercise that level of morality. There are other hints of morality in creation, but not to the degree that we as humans have it.
Which is the end of the end of this section.
This section,
Yeah. It was like they demonstrate that God's law is written within them for their own conscience, either accuse them or tell them they are doing what is right. Yeah,
that's right.
So
listen to your conscience, folks. And you can cultivate your conscience. We can, even as Christians, we can sear our conscience. So the best way to cultivate our conscience is to reflect on Torah, is to reflect on the teachings of the Sermon on the Mount, not just dismiss them, that's not relevant, but actually recognize, no, that is the model of godly living, and reflect on that and examine your own heart through that. And what that does is it softens our conscience so that we become more tuned into right and wrong. Because it all boils back to the Eden narrative, the tree of knowing right and wrong. And God always intended that we would learn right and wrong from him, not that we would seize or determine right and wrong for ourselves. And so I think that's where our conscience comes in. Don't underestimate it. Anyway, enough said on that point.
The next part was about the Jews relying so much on their law, their rules. We're following it to the nth degree.
And we are saved because we're Jews and we obey Torah.
Yeah.
And that's right.
And nowadays it's following the 316 laws and...
Totally.
Yeah.
Exactly. So he's now going to have a go at the Jews about, obviously they're trying to say, no, which is Paul's argument all the way through. You know, he had the problem in Galatia, he had the problem in Antioch, everywhere Paul went, he had Jews saying you need to be circumcised and obey the law. Yeah. And he's trying to say, no, that's not going to get you saved.
And if you don't obey, and sort of throwing it back at him, it's like if you don't obey God's law, you're better off, you are no better than an uncircumcised Jew who isn't following anything. So it's like you're saying that the Gentiles are less, but if you don't follow the rules.
If you don't follow all the rules, you're no different.
So you're everybody, all in this, eggs in the same basket.
Yeah, and anyone who breaks one is guilty of breaking them all. Yeah.
it was a true. That's right. At the end of the chapter, it says, "For you're not a true Jew just because you were born a Jew, or because you've gone through the Jewish circumcision. No, a true Jew is one whose heart is right with God, and true circumcision is not a cutting of the body, but a change of heart produced by God's Spirit.
Yeah.
Whoever has that kind of change seeks praise from God, not from people." So,
And Paul's not making that up himself. That whole concept of circumcision of the heart was actually referred to. I think Jeremiah talked about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Give you a new heart.
Give you a new heart. And actually used the cutting away of the old.
Yeah.
And I think it actually uses the word circumcision of the heart in the Old Testament. So this wasn't something that was only New Testament based. There was always that hint of the outward was supposed to signify something of the inward.
Yeah.
And they had relied only on the outward as though that, okay, I'm circumcised, I'm a Jew now, but recognizing that was an outward sign of that was supposed to point to an inward change. And that's what he's talking about. That's why Paul that's why he was so adamant against circumcision. So in Galatians, where he says, those that tell you you need to be circumcised, he says, I wish they'd go and cut the whole thing off.
Yeah.
Because he was so adamant that what's going on inside one's heart is really what matters. Have we allowed the Spirit of God to cut open our heart and remove to use the metaphor, remove the foreskin of sin and remove that out and allow the genuine, loving kingdom values to come forth.
Yeah. And I think of just a reminder of Jesus sort of says to the Pharisees, you tithe to the nth degree, and you get the herbs and spices, and you get a tenth of that, and it's like, well, no, you need to do what God's called you to do:
justice and the love of God.
Love God, look after the orphans, doing those things more than tithing and cutting. To the
exactly.
nth degree.
In fact, he says his accusation to them at that point is you strain out a gnat and you swallow a camel.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is you're trying to make sure that even your drinks, you put them through a filter, so lest you drink a gnat, because a gnat is a ceremonially unclean animal, you just make sure you filter even tiny little gnats out.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you actually drank a camel because you missed the point.
Missing. Yeah.
And I love this last bit. He says, a person with a changed heart seeks praise from God and not from people.
Yeah.
And that's more a statement of faith, a statement of fact rather than anything else. It's not a statement of should. It's a statement of what actually does happen. If your heart is genuinely changed, you will desire. The end result of that will be you will be desiring to honour God with your heart and praise Him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not look at me, look at me.
Not look at me. That's right. Not look at me and point to me like a Pharisee attitude.
Yeah.
All right, so now he's going to go on to chapter 3. We'll do that chapter, and he's going to sort of then you're going to reverse that now and say, well, what's the advantage of being a Jew? Yeah. It's a bit confusing.
Yes.
As is Roman. So we'll talk to you on tomorrow's episode. See ya.
That's good. Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Bible. Wait, what? Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast so you don't miss a single episode. And you can also find us on all the socials. Just search The Bible. Wait, what? And to find out more about our church, just search C3 Camden, C3 Picton, or C3 Thirroul on the web or on the socials. Thanks for being with us today, and we look forward to talking to you on the next episode of The Bible. Wait, what?